Welcome to Tejal KHANDELWAL Study Center. I hope all of you have revised Plato through the previous video and got a lot of insights on how we can efficiently revise in a more better manner. Today's topic is Western Political Thought Aristotle. If you want to have access to the revision notes, click on the link mentioned in the description of the Telegram channel, and then you can follow the Telegram channel for regular updates for political science and international relations for UPSC CSC 2025. So let's start to revise Aristotle together. Aristotle is well known as the father of political science. He was an ancient Greek philosopher, though not Athenian by birth. He was the pupil at Plato's The Academy. He established his own school known as the Lyceum, and he was teacher of Alexander the Great. He was well versed in various disciplines like chemistry, biology, ethics, and politics. Unlike Plato, who was radical in his approach towards the solution that he provided for the problems of politics, Aristotle is more conservative in his approach. He is also very status quoist and does not recommend any kind of radical solutions to the problems. He is also a functionalist, which means he looks at things as parts of the larger whole. He also states the utility of various institutions. According to him, the most key principle that needs to be followed in politics and in life is the principle of moderation, which means golden mean is the golden rule. We should always learn how to balance rather than have radical approach towards things. Now let's move towards the works of Aristotle. His key contribution is the Politics, which remains relevant even today. He talks about state as the chief source, the highest of all associations, the most natural associations, and state as the chief source of what? It is about individual goodness, individual happiness and well-being. He also analyzes nearly 158 constitutions of his times and advocates various political institutions and constitutions' importance. In Nicomachean Ethics, he talks about the nature of individual happiness or well-being, and his idea of happiness will differ than how we understand it today. Methodology. If we look at Plato's methodology, Plato is philosophical in his approach, which means he moves towards an ideal pursuit. He moves towards political idealism. He moves towards philosophical absolutism. On the other hand, Aristotle is very scientific in his methodology, which means all the parameters of the methods that he adopts are also used in various natural sciences. That is because he was well versed in various other disciplines, and that's why his larger study of biology, chemistry, physics has enabled him to apply those principles in the study of the science of politics. According to him, the various aspects of his methodology can be termed as scientific and analytical. It is inductive in approach, which means he is moving towards what? He is moving towards from particular to general. In the sense, he says that for various needs of man, various institutions are created. So he moves from the lower to the higher. And that's why we say from particular to the general. But that does not mean deductive aspect does not exist. Yes, his methodology can also be viewed as deductive because he talks of this movement from particular to general with the larger idea of individual happiness and well-being, which means the larger good of human life. On the other hand, we say that his method is also historical because he has studied the causes of revolutions across history and he values the importance of experience, and he also gives suggestions for the revolutions. His methodology is also comparative, which is also forming the basis of comparative politics even in modern times. He compared and he studied nearly 158 constitutions of his times. His method is also teleological in nature, which means he says the man's destiny is ordained by nature, which means it is moving towards a particular end and is destined to move towards that end. That's why we say his methodology is also teleological in nature. He also brings in analytical, observational, empirical observations, practical observations that he makes around the situation around him, and then he advocates various solutions. Thus, he marks a shift towards more realistic politics than Plato or Socrates would have advocated. What is his view on philosophy? So, does he condemn philosophy? No, he says that political philosophy should enable us to give certain general guidance, certain rules of behavior, but we cannot sacrifice the whole of life in philosophical abstractions and assume that there are universal ideas and reality is only based on these ideas, like Plato said. So it should be like a guiding light, but we cannot make anything more philosophically absolutist in nature. What about ethics? What does he say about ethics? So he says politics and ethics are inseparable in nature, which means he says both have a common end or a common purpose, which means that is good and that is good of human life. Ethics is applied at the individual level and politics is applied at the larger community level. Thus, he says ethics is not only about having the ability to reason and to distinguish between right and wrong. Ethics is also about practice. It is also about action. And this practice and action comes when possessing qualities and practicing them. For example, you may have the idea of truth. You may know what is truth. But being truthful in action is a different ball game altogether. So we know how many of us are truthful in that regard. So possessing a virtue is not only important, or knowing something is not important. It is also about to what extent we practice these things. So he says ethics is not only about having reason alone. It is also about practice and action. Thus, ethics remains a branch of political science according to Aristotle. What is virtue according to him? What is virtue? Virtue means balance, which means a mean between any two extremes. That's why he always advocates golden mean is the best principle. The most important, that which means the state is also ordained for the happiness of an individual, or he calls it as eudaimonia. What is his idea of happiness or eudaimonia? Today we understand happiness more as a sentiment or more as a feeling. But for him, happiness, which is the idea of achievement of excellence of an individual. It is moving towards your best self. That is happiness. So he does not view happiness in very narrow terms, but he gives it a very broad and deeper meaning. So he says, happiness is not only feeling or state of mind. It is an activity. It is a quest for excellence in an individual's life. And he says, the idea of good. Yes, good is betterment of large as we have understood. But for him, he gives it various parameters. He says, what is good? Good is justice in quality. It is moderation in quantity. And it is various opportunities that come with time. And how we make best of these three things. That is moving towards good. So, he rejected the notion of unified good in transcendental sense as Plato had advocated. So he says it is both reason and action and not reason alone which leads towards good. Fine. Now, He is well known as the father of political science. Why he is called as the father of political science? Because he is the first one to critically analyze and understand and systematically talk about the then existing constitutions and classify them. It was his attempt in the very first context which makes him the father of political science. He says, political science is a master science, which means the purpose of political science is what? It is concerned with the end of human life. End here means objective, okay? And that is to secure a good life. And all other disciplines are moving towards this greater aim that political science has as the key question, which means maybe physics or maybe biology or chemistry. All these disciplines are trying to ease man's life. But all the activities, all the policies, all the actions about human life, how society will be organized, how polity will be organized, what are the steps that will be taken, whose concern is that? It is the concern of the discipline of political science. So he says that political science is the master science from which all other sciences emerge. It is a practical science. So we have theoretical sciences like algebra, physics, geometry and chemistry. We have productive sciences like sculpture and painting. But political science and social sciences are the most practical aspect of life. So he says we should see things as they are. An approach to problems should be essentially realistic in nature and through observation of various political institutions. So his emphasis as one of the first thinkers on these ideas makes him realistic, empirical, as well as the father of political science. Now, so he is also the first one to bring the empirical and realistic aspect, as well as the first one to bring the comparative method in the discipline. Now let's move towards his theory of state. If we look at the state or the city-state that was there in the ancient Greece, so state can be viewed through two perspectives. One is the sophist perspective and one is the Socratic perspective. Sophists say that state is an artificial institution. It is a creation of man. But the Socratic tradition says state is natural in nature. State may be existing or have come into chronologically, man came first and state came later. But state is an institution in which man's well-being and best self is realized. So the Socratic tradition says state is natural and the sophist tradition says state is an artificial institution created by man. And the Socratic tradition says it is prior to man. So, how does he talk about the state? He talks about the existence of state through the understanding about human nature. Which means, what does he talk about human nature? He says, human nature is that individual is social animal. Individual is a political animal. And looking at this natural instinct of man, that is innate sociability in order to have interaction with other people in the community and society, make state as natural. So he says that human nature and state are vitally interlinked. He says there are various human needs, that is there is a hierarchy of needs of man which are fulfilled through various institutions. For example, the primary needs that are biological needs and other needs are met in the family. The social needs of man are met in the village. And the moral or the self-actualization or the movement towards excellence or eudaimonia, that is happiness, is achieved only in the state. Which means a man who can live without a state can either be God or he is a beast. But a normal being who is social, who is innately intrinsically, interlinked with other human beings in the society, needs the state for his self-actualization and moral needs. So state is for him the highest of all associations. It is through state that good life can be achieved, which means how the polity and the society is being organized. And the one who can live without state is either God or beast. So he makes state as the highest and most natural of all associations. And he gives justification also in this regard. So he says, origin of the state, it might appear that man has come chronologically prior and state has come later. But he says, it might appear so. Social and political needs of man are met within the state. He says, on the teleological grounds, that man's movement and man is destined to achieve his ends only in the state. And on the grounds of logic, the moral and rational nature of individual is perfected only in society and not on his own. That's why he justifies the importance of state in the life of an individual on the origin, on the teleological grounds, as well as on the logical grounds. So, he also emphasizes on the role of education in state. He says, it sustains diverse and social and political activities. It is only through education that diversity can be maintained. He has also given criticism of Plato in this regard, because Plato tries to achieve unity in the state. And that's why the kind of solution also he gives. So he says, any economic motive can divide the state. That's why we should have communism of family and property. And he says that, if the ruler has the lust for power, that can also lead to division in the state. That's why he says philosopher king should rule the state. But Aristotle says that we should see that state becomes enriched through diversity and plurality. And that is the way we can achieve more better goals, rather than trying to maintain plurality through how Plato has advocated it. So, now, let's move towards his views towards family and property. So, family is part of the household and property is also part of the household. Both serve the social, the biological and the economic needs. So, household is concerned about that. Now, for him to achieve a good life, what is needed? It is in family that a bond is being created. The need of pleasure of both man and woman are met, and various other needs are met. And how is the private life organized? That reflects largely in the public sphere. So he says that man and wife's physical needs are met in the family. Man and child share an emotional bond. Master and slave, the material needs are met like that. However, he says that there cannot be sexual equality in the family. Why there cannot be sexual equality is because if women are allowed to be part of the private as well as the public sphere, it will be very difficult to control them. Because if there are no laws governing their private sphere, then they will not give respect for authority. Neither they will be able to do the household very well. So, for him, sexual equality should not be there. Unlike Plato, who speaks about women should be released from all these family kind of things so that they can focus on the public sphere. They can also become philosopher queen. But Aristotle differs on this ground. So, is woman a slave? No. A woman is not a slave. She is a complement, but she should be confined to the private household. And he says, family and property are the only instruments that are not end in themselves. Fine. Now, let's view his view towards property. Now, he says that property and the possession towards property is very natural in man, because firstly it meets the economic needs, it meets the material needs, and economic and material needs are also important to sustain your life. And he says that it also gives man a sense of achievement, a sense of achieving something better. So he says that property is both an ethical good as well as a potential evil. Now, why this kind of a view? He says ethical good because it is an economic aspect of life and material goods are necessary to lead a good life. On the other hand, it is a potential evil. Why? Because only economic aspect of life is not sufficient for a good life. Also, political life visualizes good life as a whole. So he says we should not focus too much on the economic aspect. It is necessary, but it is not sufficient. The political issues, the political concerns, the public concerns are something that needs to be focused upon. That's why he says property is both an ethical good for betterment of individuals as well as it can become a potential evil, because we should, if we focus too much on concentration of this kind of property, it is problematic. Which means, don't you think that Aristotle had very earlier envisaged that class system exists and all individuals seek their own advantage? So yes, within the political system as a whole, he knew that men will be guided towards their economic class interest. And this was very much thought earlier. Now let's see what is the views that he talks about various aspects of property. So he says there are two types of property. One is the animate and one is the inanimate. The animate, which means living, is the slave, and the inanimate is the land. How should be the production of property? What should be the system? So there is two type of production. One is a natural system of production, which means where man has invested his labor. And one is an unnatural, which means man has not invested in labor, but by means of various other activities that he is able to gain wealth. Example, money lending is an activity where you don't have to put in your labor, but you build wealth on wealth. What should be the system of exchange? So he says there are two types of system of exchange. One is fair and one is an unfair, which means if anything that is being priced at its real value, then the system of exchange is fair. But if it is priced at a higher value, then what it should be, it is an unfair system. An overvalued thing is an unfair system of exchange. However, what is of importance about his views on property is what is the kind of system of distribution that he envisages. So he says there are three types of distribution of the system of property. So one is a common ownership and common use. Another is a common ownership and individual use. And third is an individual ownership and common use. So he says that the first two systems are not good. Why? Because common ownership and common use will lead to what? Which means when he say everybody's responsibility is no one's responsibility. If it is common ownership and it is common use, no one will maintain that kind of a property. So we see the conditions that are happening of parks. We are not very good civically responsible of doing and maintenance of these common ownership things. On the other hand, common ownership and individual is very illogical in nature. It doesn't sound logical at all. But the individual ownership and common use are good system. Why so? Because the individual ownership and common use is a system which will lead to what? So it is a system which balances individualism also with socialism, which means both will be well achieved. That's why this system is a very good system. Individual ownership and common use. And what else will it bring in society? It will bring productivity in society. It will bring stability in society. It will bring care in society. There will also be sense of achievement for the individuals. It is like a good virtue where you own it, but you are allowing everyone to use, which means you are looking at the larger public good. It also brings stability because both things are being achieved for the individual's sense of achievement as well as for the larger societal good. It will also bring values like charity. That's why he says advantages of individual ownership and common use. So yes, the concept of individualism and socialism was very much earlier envisaged by Aristotle. So within the household, he talks about family, he talks about no social equality, he talks about how family also serves the economic and material needs, and that is why the views on property are interlinked within the sphere of the household. And one another important element, okay, at that time, which he justified, which does not remain an institution today, was the institution of slavery. So for the household, even slavery was important in Aristotle's view. Now let's see how. So let's move towards his views on slavery. So why he justifies slavery? Because he says that we have to look at things in a more realistic sense, which means that all men are not born equal. All individuals differ in their capacity to reason, to think, to analyze, and with respect to their skill set, abilities. So, when all men are unequal, there are some men which are obviously superior and some men which are inferior. And the most realistic solution, according to Aristotle, is that the superior should rule the inferior. And we should not disturb this law, according to Aristotle. He says that slavery as an institution is universal. Why? Because some by nature are born free and others as slave. Why they are born free? They are born free because they can think, they can analyze, they have an intellect of their own. So he justifies slavery as beneficial on both grounds, from the point of the master as well as from the point of the slave. So he says the master will be relieved of the menial course of public life, and he can focus on the public life because all the menial course in the private household will be done by the slave. On the other hand, the slave will imbibe moral intellectual excellence in the presence of a master who will train the slave to think and reason, which he naturally does not possess. So he justified it from both perspectives. Now, who are slaves? So he says that this particular institution is triumph of reason as well as virtue, mutually beneficial as well as just in nature. And who are the slaves? So he says that if it is a just war, right, which means it has been fought on the principles of higher excellence or intellect or the great quality of the leaders who have really fought on the basis of their abilities, then all the prisoners of war can be made slave. So the war should be what? It should be a just war. But if it is an unjust war, then you cannot make all the enemies, right, as a slave. Which means a war is unjust when it is fought by treachery or cheating. So in such a condition, you should not make the defeated enemy as a slave. So he had put a word of caution on who should be made slaves and who should not be made slaves. And there was the just cause according to him, which is depending on the intellect on the ability, on the skills and the aptitude of the kings, and the cause for which the war has been fought. What is the sophist view on slavery? Sophists do not justify slavery. They say that all men are born free and equal, and slavery is violation of nature. So on this ground, we can say that sophists have a more nuanced view than what Aristotle had possessed. Now let's move towards his views on citizenship. Why citizenship is very important for Aristotle? According to him, citizenship is very important for good life in a state. So, how he understands the idea of citizenship? He understands the idea of citizenship not merely by being born, which means, as we understand the modern idea of citizenship, any individual who is born in India, irrespective of their class, caste, gender, religion, sex, or place of birth, becomes an Indian citizen, which means that is the modern conception of citizen. You have to be born in India, irrespective of any aspect of your identity. But Aristotle says no, it is not by the virtue of birth that makes you a citizen. Then what is the quality that makes a citizen? It is the function that you perform that makes you a citizen in a state. Which means, what is the kind of function that you have to perform to be classified as citizen? That is, you should be participating in the public affairs of the state. You should have deliberative capacity, which means you should be able to use your intellect in order to work on the common issues that are impacting and be enabling factor to take decisions that impact the common life of all individuals within the society. So if you have these deliberative faculties and you can reach towards judgments and in judicial capacities take decision, only then you can be a citizen. Not all individuals can become citizens, because when you become a citizen, there will be certain onus of duty and responsibility that will come upon you. That's why he made citizenship as elitist in nature rather than universal as it is in the modern times. Understood? Now, so who is citizen? A citizen is not by birth but by function. And there is one contrast or one line of layering of understanding that you have to put here. So he says, however, by heredity, you can become a citizen. On one hand, he is saying not by birth but by function and by heredity, which means those who have been classified as citizens by the virtue of the function that they perform, their sons can become citizen, which means those who are already elitist, their further generations will by heredity become citizens. Okay, now, so he says all residents are also not citizen. Why this factor that all residents? Because lot of people from the neighboring city-states come and migrated and lived for various, as traders, as merchants, as artists, as writers, of practicing various occupations. That's why all residents cannot be citizens. Fine. So he says only Greek, adult, male and propertied. So you should possess property, which means your economic material needs are satisfied. You should be a male, because he says that there is no sexual equality. Women should be confined within the sphere of the household. She should not come in the public sphere. Why? Because then even the private sphere will be disturbed. Adult, which means children and elderly cannot be, and it should be Greek. So women, slaves and aliens are not citizens. Understood? And that's how citizenship is understood in Aristotle. Now let's see why he does not make it universal. Because there were a lot of internal conflicts that were going within the states at that time. There were also threats from neighboring states. So those residents who would have migrated and come, they would have also created participated in the public affairs, and that would have created a lot of challenges. And for him, the chief concern was peace within the society and stability of the state. What is the status of citizen? So he says the status of a citizen will vary with the state. What do you mean it will vary with the state? Which means, what is the nature of the government? So, how the nature of government will change the citizenship? So, if it is a despotic tyranny, then the citizen might have to even go against the state. But if it is a stable polity and if it is a participatory form of government, then there will not be any conflict between you as a good individual and a good citizen. Which means you will have to follow the rule of law, and then all the other good virtues will follow. But if it is a tyranny, then you might have to go against the state. So by the virtue of citizenship, you are not merely a citizen, but you are a shaper of the nature of the state. So there is an onus of duty and responsibility that comes in his theory of citizenship. All right. So it is not only about rights, but it is also about duties that he envisages. So he says there are functional roles. So he says in an ideal polis, there is no clash between a good man and a good citizen, which means you don't have to, you can be a good man as well as you will follow the rules and you will be a good citizen. On the other hand, if it is a perverted form of government, there will be clash between individual righteousness and good citizenship. So you will not follow what has been told to you by the state. You might even have to express dissent. Why? Because the values of good man and good citizenship will clash. All right. This is how, in a very nuanced and a more deeper manner, he understands citizenship. Now let's move towards his concept of equality. So, do you think Aristotle is an individual or a thinker who can be praised for his views on equality? No. We know that Aristotle is conservative. He is also elitist in many ways. So, he doesn't want to have equality in society, because according to him, all men are not born equal, which means all men don't have similar capacities, abilities, reason, thinking, intellect. And that's why all men cannot be treated equally. So he is not a person who justifies equalities. In fact, he is the one who justifies inequalities. And that's why he is an advocate of proportionate equality, which means as your status, you will be treated like that. So, the basis of formal equality in ancient Greece has been laid down by Aristotle. So, let's see what he says. He justifies inequality by saying equals should be treated unequally and unequals treated equally. So, for example, a common man and a civil servant, or a civil servant and a politician. All these three individuals cannot be treated similar manner. We have to treat all of them in different ways because all three possess different qualities. That is why Aristotle justifies equal treatment to equals, which means one common man can be treated like another common man. But a common man and a civil servant cannot be treated equally. A civil servant and a politician cannot be treated equally. They both belong to different classes and both have different capacities, abilities, intellect. And that's why all three need to be treated differently. Now, so he says like cases should be treated like and unlike cases should be treated unlike. Is this difference understood? Now, he talks about proportionate equality because he says just reward should be based on merit. So, as your talent, as your capacity, that is the kind of reward you should receive in society. So yes, he is laying a sort of a formal and very early notion of formal and legal equality rather than a substantive form of equality which deepens with time. So we can say that the concept of formal equality came in whose period, in whose thought? In Aristotle's thought. It is not, so it is a procedural, it is not, it is a formal and not a substantive equality. Reasons is because he says desire for equality is not actually, it is not possible in the real world. It is just like a vision. You cannot have it in the real world. He talks about a meritocratic society, which means as your merit, you should be treated like that, which means if it is a running race and if a person is physically disabled, right, we cannot have any extra benefit that the physically disabled athlete can be given. Everybody start at the same race and who can run faster will win the race according to him. And he justifies slavery also. Okay. So yes, in the concept of equality, he is more formal, he's more procedural, he's more proportionate. And that's why he's well known as a person or thinker who justifies inequalities rather than talking of equality. Now let's understand his concept of justice. So he is very conservative in his approach when we talk about his concept of justice. So he says that we should always keep the existing order intact. He mentioned in the Nicomachean Ethics, justice is a perfect virtue that is displayed towards others. There are many who can practice virtue in their own private affairs, but cannot do so in their relations with others. So what is justice for him? Is it only possessing a good quality? Is it only possessing righteousness? Is it only about knowing what is moral? No. For Aristotle, justice is not only possession of the virtue, it is virtue in action, which means you may know what is truth. Only knowing of truth is not justice. When you are truthful towards others, when you practice in behavior towards others, that is when justice will be realized. So for him, justice is something as a virtue or a quality that comes into practice and action and not only restricts to private affairs, but it is the behavior that an individual has towards all others. All right. So he says justice is virtue in action. It is important for regulation of human relations. Action because it is conduct in practical life and it should be this worldly. It is not some moral idea. It is not some concept that we are thinking in our mind, and that is justice. Only when it comes in practice, it becomes justice. So he talks about types of justice. One is a general and complete justice, which means the moral virtue and the goodness of the people, which towards everybody else. So he has a moral broad aspect, moral context to his idea, as well as a particular context to his concept of justice. So he says there is a distributive justice, there is a retributive, corrective or remedial justice, and a commutative justice, which applies in different spheres. So distributive justice is concern of the legislator. Retributive and commutative justice are concerns of whom? Of the judiciary. So he talks of justice in the moral sense, but as a virtue in action and practice and complete goodness towards others. On the other hand, he also says in particular dimension how it should come in practice. So there is a legal aspect also that he brings to the concept of justice. Now, in the state, so he says, what is the importance of justice in a state? So he says, it is the essence of the state. It saves the state from destruction. Only justice, which means when we practice it in both moral, as a moral virtue, as well as in these legislative and judicial dimensions, that it will save the state from destruction. So we know the cause of revolution everywhere is what? Inequality. So this sense, if justice will not prevail in action and practice towards each other, we will not be able to have a stable state. So it will lead to what? Destruction, according to Aristotle. And okay, it is justice which takes the state towards ethical values. That's why it is very, very important. So understood, it is a moral aspect also, moral aspect, and not only as a virtue but always in practice, and particular aspect, which means distributive justice as work of the legislator on how rewards will be distributed, and retributive and commutative justice is with respect to payment of damages, as well as to what extent here in commutative sense voluntary transactions and others are being adhered. Okay, now let's see what he talks about laws. So let's see what he talks about the rule of law. He is a functionalist as well as moderate in his approach, which means when we say he's a functionalist in terms of law, he looks at things from more a broader picture and the context of the parts in context of this entire whole. And moderation because he does not advocate radical solutions. Like Plato, who talks about philosopher king, and he believes in philosopher king who will be not having lust for power and not become despotic because he has gone through a rigorous training. Aristotle does not believe in the rule of one because he says that it is only through the rule of law which binds both the ruler as well as the ruled, which means the citizens as well as the rulers. And nobody can act by force, nobody can always act as arbitrary. Thus, rather than having the rule of philosopher king or one single leader, it is better to have the rule of law. It is which will guide actions of both the ruler as well as the ruled. So he says, law is a reason unaffected by passion, which means the philosopher king may become passionate and may become corrupt, but law will not, because law is guided by common wisdom. Law is guided by reason. It has been shaped due to customary experiences across history. It has been shaped by the common wisdom, deliberative, judicial faculties of those who are making it. Thus, he says that there should be rule of law because it is less arbitrary, it is more fair in nature, it is result of wisdom and custom, it is representing collective wisdom, and it is objectification of reason, which means it will become difficult to break law rather than challenge the philosopher king. Now let's see his views on revolution. So do you think Aristotle likes revolution? No. Aristotle is a conservative. He is a status quoist. So he does not want revolution. Why he don't want revolution? Because he has studied nearly 158 constitution, and for him it is the problem of political instability is a key concern across all these states. So he says there should not be political instability in the state, otherwise we cannot achieve excellence, happiness, well-being, good of all, or betterment of society at large. Thus, revolution for him is a problem. But he also talks about the causes of the revolution, and he also gives suggestions and remedy of revolution. And we can see how there is a difference in approach between Aristotle and Marx on revolution. Now, so the key concern for Aristotle is political instability. What is the meaning of revolution according to Aristotle? He says it is a change in constitution, it can be a change in the ruler, it can be a big or small change, it can be total or partial revolution, It can also be a palace revolution. It can be violence and destruction that has been created. Any form, any change, any aspect of life where there is some sort of disruption or instability is a revolution. So he gives too many parameters to the concept of revolution and does not view it as a comprehensive change. It can also be a small change which brings instability. So he talks of causes, general as well as particular causes to revolution. Now, so general causes, he says that the most important cause is the feeling of deprivation and because of inequality or injustice that is occurring. So he says any form of government you take, anywhere, the most common cause is inequality. Then he says when few people have privilege and the others don't, even this can lead to deprivation. Rivalries amongst the various leaders, factions, even this can lead to revolution. Greediness on the part of the ruling class can also lead to revolution. Dissent in the state by the common masses can also lead to revolution. He also talks of particular revolutions, which means in different forms of government there can be there can be causes for revolution. So for example, in a democracy, he says that the leaders are very unprincipled, they are corrupt, then it can lead to revolution. In oligarchy, few individuals become more influential than others, then it can cause revolution, which means they will club together as one and then try to change the others. So this can lead to a revolution. And in aristocracy, the disparity between the rich and poor increase. Even this can cause revolution. So he talks of particular forms and he also talks of the general causes of revolution. So he says we should counter discontent, we should use education, we should create patriotism, we should have feeling of loyalty that has to be ingrained in the masses, and these are the ways that revolution can be prevented. Okay, and mistreatment of any class of section should not happen. Now, let's see what are the difference in the views of Aristotle and Marx on revolution. So, if we look at the philosophical basis, Aristotle's views is conservative as well as status quoist. He is not having any liking towards revolution, but for Marx, revolution is prerequisite to bring a new social order or social change. So he gives a radical perspective towards revolution, and Aristotle is status quoist. He is not favorable towards revolution. If we talk about the nature of change, so for Aristotle, any political change, palace change, rivalries, political dissent, right? Anything in political sphere is a revolution. On the other hand, for Marx, it is a comprehensive change, which means change in the base or the structure of the society, the base change in superstructure. That is the revolution. Context. The context is the situation in the ancient Greece which lead to such kind of views, and his study of 158 constitutions and historical experience and historical method makes him to conclude on the theory of revolution. On the other hand, Marx and the Industrial Revolution in Europe, the specific circumstances of the concentration of wealth by the bourgeoisie and the ownership of the private property by the bourgeoisie led him to formulate his theory about revolution. The cause was sense of injustice by the non-ruling, that was felt by the non-ruling class, and here the sense of exploitation that comes into the proletariat. Impact, it will lead to political instability according to Aristotle, and it will lead to an advent of a new change, new age, a new order, new social order in society. So is revolution desirable for Aristotle? No. Is it desirable for Marx? Yes. Now, very, very important and asked also many times in the examination is his theory of constitution. Now, how do we understand his theory of constitution? So, we have to understand the term constitution, how it has been understood by Aristotle. So, he says, see, constitution is actually equated with government. It is the way of life, and it is not only the legal structure or the legal document or legal principles that we understand of constitution today. So he says constitution is the identity of the polis, which means if the constitution changes, that is the form of government, and within the government, what is the ruling party? Okay, so if the form of government changes, the whole principle on which the state will be reorganized will change. That's why change in constitution, which means change in the form of government, brings new kind of principles, which means new identity to the state. Okay, this is his meaning. So never understand the theory of constitution from the term constitution in the literal sense. We understand it in the modern times. Okay, so in his books, book 3 of politics, he talks of constitution. Constitution, he says, is not only the legal basis or legal structure. It is state itself and whole of national life, which means it is not state itself because constitution is state. No, it is because the values of life change when the form of government changes, which means the whole identity of the state will change, right? And he says constitution is a way of life. Why? Because it formulates certain principles on which the government is organized, and how the government is organized, that is how the state will function. So India is also a state, Saudi Arabia is also a state, China is also a state, and US is also a state. But we see that all of them have different forms of government. So as the government changes, which means not only the ruling party, as the form of government, be it democracy or be it a communist form or be it a monarchy, okay, right, or be it in Iran a theocracy, as this government is changing, the form of government is changing, the whole way on which the state is organized changes. So understand it in this sense. Okay, so he says constitution has to be understood as a way of life, because only through how the constitution is organized we will come to know whether we have a life of virtue and happiness or no. So whether the people in India are happy, whether people in China are happy, or people in Saudi Arabia or Iran are happy. Okay, so how it is based? It is based on the political organization within the state. तो state कैसे organize होता है? Determines the life and character and whole of national life of the citizens. That's why constitution is termed as way of life. Got it? I hope you have got it. Okay, if you have any doubts, then you can put it in the comments. Okay, now, so it is the basis, constitution is the basis of the organization of the state, of the offices of the state. Which office will do what, whether judiciary will be independent or no, or whether judiciary will be, guided by the executive. Is there separation of powers? Is there a federal structure or no? So all of this depends on the constitution, which means not only the document will talk about the principles, the articles, but what is the philosophy behind this organization? Okay, now, so who is the sovereign authority within the state? So we have, in Iran a different sovereign authority than we have it in India, right? And the aim of the various associations that are there in the political organization. Organization यहाँ पे institution नहीं है. It is किस तरीके से एक दूसरे के साथ हम वर्क करते हैं और कैसे हमें एक common thread से link किया गया. That organization. Okay? Which means how we are organizing our life, around what principles we are organizing, what institutions we are creating, that organization. Okay? So political organization of the state. So constitution is a way of life because it will determine whether we will live a happy life or no. And it is giving the identity to the polis. It gives the identity to the state. So that's why India is called as a democracy and Saudi Arabia is called as like a theocracy and Iran is called as a theocratic state. Fine. Now, let's see how he makes the classification of the constitution. So, classification of various forms of government and what is the basis of the formation of these various governments. Okay. Now, so you've understood when we talk of constitution, the form of government and how this form of government determines the character of the state. Okay. Now, so he talks of the quantitative basis and the qualitative basis. What is the quantitative? Which means whether it is being formed by one person, ruled by one person or few persons or many persons. And when we say qualitative basis, which means what are the ends or the goals that they are serving. So it can be either a pure, so when we say pure, which means in the interest of the people. When we say perverted or corrupt, which means in the interest of the rulers. So there are, let's see qualitatively. Okay. So we have one pure form of government is monarchy because it is for the good of the community. It is the best form of government, right? Why? Because one man is preeminent in virtue and therefore power to be given to be king or god among these people, fine, among various men. And there will be deliberative, judicial, magisterial power all in one hand. That's why monarchy is pure. It is best. But if the wisdom will go, it will become, or if it is guided by force, it will become tyranny and it will become the worst form of government. So, monarchy is good, but if the same person become arbitrary, it is problematic. It will become pervert or corrupt form of government. Then we have aristocracy. So, what is aristocracy? It is government of best men working for the interest of public as a whole. Okay, right? Now, so these rulers have what? They have virtue, they have merit, they have wealth, they have liberty. But it will become pervert or corrupt when will it become oligarchy? When rulers are rich and rich are few and they are running a government only for their benefit. So it's okay if they have wealth, but if this wealth is only for their own purpose, for their benefit, then it becomes corrupt and pervert. Now when we say polity is best practicable because it is ruled by middle class. It is neither corrupt like democracy where it is rule of the ignorant masses, neither it is rule of the rich. Okay. It is between these extremes. So it balances authority as well as liberty. It stabilizes. That's why polity is a pure form of government. So rulers are belonging to what? Middle class. They are neither rich that they were there, neither they are poor. Okay. So it is a compromise sort of an arrangement that he is doing. So there is deliberative faculty, executive faculty and judicial faculty, okay, which are there within this polity. Fine. Now, so polity is a mixed constitution. It is real and practicable form. Fine. So it is like a buffer. Alright. It is middle class people and they are enough competent to rule. but the decisions that are taken will be approved. So it will have certain liberty of the democracy also. Okay. So yes, decisions approved by people. It will give that feeling. Golden mean, middle of two extremes, monarchy and democracy. Monarchy as ideal and democracy as worst. So it is like a middle of the two extremes. Golden mean, that is polity. It is government which is run by rule of law. So what comes in polity? So when we say decisions by people, so both the ruler as well as the ruled are governed by rule of law. Fine. So it is best practicable state which reconcile virtue and stability, quantity as well as quality. Fine. And balances both rich and poor, because poor don't want to listen to rich and rich don't want to give up on their wealth. So both have some problem towards each other. So it is the rule of the middle class which creates a buffer, which creates a stability in all good qualities as well as numbers. And when we have a rule of law, there will be no arbitrariness and no force. So the monarchy will also not become what? Tyranny. Neither it will become what? Democracy, where ignorant masses are ruling. So they are competent people and they are also having some sort of wealth, some property element is there. Okay? Now, what about, so the theory of constitution is very important. Understand how it is the form of government and how form of government shape the nature of state also. That's why the kind of state India is will differ from the kind of state Iran is, or the kind of state China is. Okay. It is the constitution, the form of government which determine principles of the whole national life, the sovereign authority, the associations, how people will live. What will govern them? Rule of law, or it will be some customary law? What it will be? So constitution theory is very important and it is very relevant also. Okay, even in the present time. So he is trying to bring that great balance by creating, right, polity as the best practicable form of government. Now, let's talk of economics of politics. So he knew, we saw it, that when he's talking of property, so he says that, all men have a basic idea of advantage of their society. So there will always be this classes, he says, in society. So fundamental conflict in all society, he says, is there between rich and poor, very much. So this is the road to Marx. Okay. Now, people for their own class advantage at the expense of public good. So they will always keep their private interest, their class interest very important. So what should be done? Property should be allowed, natural. It should be a means to people's ethical betterment. And we should not have communism like Plato. So you allow them also, right? So it will eventually balance out things. They will feel sense also and it will serve their private interest. But he says again, economic motive should not dominate too much in the political sphere. Fine? Now, so who is superior? Is it Plato or is it Aristotle? To this I will answer that it is with which perspective you see. If you are too real, then you will have to move towards more excellence. So you have to go towards the idealist, that is Plato. But if you are too idealistic without keeping into concern the practicality and real aspects, then we'll have praise for what? Realist and empiricist like Aristotle. And it is the critical reasoning that was emphasized by Plato, the teacher, that led Aristotle to do open criticism of his master. So what is more important? It is the search for truth that is more important, which was there in the master as well as his disciple. Okay, master or teacher we say. Okay, so it is in this sense, both have their own greatness, both have their own criticism. It is very difficult to determine who is superior to the other. Now, an important question comes with respect to comparison. So, when we compare Plato and Aristotle, there are various dimensions on which we compare. What is the relationship between them? What is the methodology? So, one is philosophical, one is scientific, we have understood. What is their view? One is the ideal state. One says polity is best practicable and should be governed by rule of law. Then on justice, like for Plato, it is more of righteousness, more moral. But for Aristotle, it is in practice moral, complete justice also, as well as particular justice in the legislature as well as the judiciary. So he talks of legal aspect and moral aspect both. Then on law, so the Plato emphasizes more on philosopher king and Aristotle is more about rule of law emphasis. And on family and property, one has a view that there should be communism, that is Plato, and Aristotle says that we should focus more on what? We should have these institutions because they can be potential evil, but they also act as a ethical what? Betterment of lives, of good lives of people. And family is something like a time-tested institution. It acts like a bond between various needs, emotional, physical, pleasure, sleep. Fine. So this is about Aristotle. Understand the theory of constitution very well. If you have any doubts, you can put them in the comments. I will clear it. And it has a lot of relevance. And yes, these two thinkers are forming the basis of all the ideas that we will study in the political theory. So please revise these videos. I'm sure it will help you a lot. Thank you so much. All the best. Take care.